Hello everyone, my name is Brian Scholes and I'm a manager with Ausenco, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar, How Can You Maximize ROI in Your Mining Operations? I'd like to thank you for attending the live webinar today and those who are viewing the recording. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Everyone is on mute today to avoid presenter distraction and noise feedback. Should you want to ask any questions, you can type them into the question box available to you on your side panel. A copy of the webinar will be sent via email to everyone who is registered in the next few weeks. We will also have a quick exit survey when you leave the webinar. On to today's webinar. In collaboration with our valued partner Ausenco, we have been hosting a series of webinars shedding light on the changing landscape of mineral processing projects through a project lifecycle and sharing best practice on how to achieve optimal outcomes at each stage. I'd now like to introduce today's facilitator, Matt Pyle, a Technical Solutions Director at Ausenco. Over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Brian, and good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever in the world you might be dialing in from or watching this afterwards. As Brian mentioned, this is the fifth in our webinar series on the changing landscape of minerals processing. It'll be the last one of the year and it'll wrap up the series. For those of you that haven't seen the earlier webinars, we've provided a bit of an overview and introduction webinar. We presented a webinar on studies, how to design cost-effective projects, how to execute them, and finally, in the project lifecycle, we're talking about how to operate and optimize existing operations. And I guess it's probably no surprise there's a bit of a theme of value through this webinar, so we're continuing that. Really, we're saying how can you maximize your return on investment when you get into an operating phase of a project. The people if you've seen the previous webinars, you've probably seen me, might even be getting sick of me by this point, but I'm Director of Technical Solutions at Ausenco. With me today, I've brought in some subject matter experts. I've got with me Sergio Ura, who's the Asset Optimization Director for APAC Africa, and Harold Lopez, who's a metallurgist at the Capricorn Copper Mine. Both Sergio and Harold sort of started their lives in South America, and they're both working in Australia at the moment. So I guess it's just highlighting the fact that we've got a very sort of global industry that we work in with people from all over the place. So today's topic is how we maximize return on investment. The three talks that we'll be talking about, firstly, I'll be explaining how we should be considering mining operations as a business. Sergio will be talking about the importance of the right operational strategy, and to that discussion he'll bring his years of experience in asset optimization in terms of maintenance, reliability, and those facets. And then Harold will be talking about his experience over the last couple of years working at our Capricorn Copper operation in North Queensland, and the title of that section is How Small Incremental Steps Can Lead to Great Things. Like all the webinars, I should say, please feel free to ask questions. We will have some time at the end. You can put those questions in whenever you like and whenever you think of them, and we'll come back to those questions in the last 10 to 15 minutes. So I wanted to start off by putting the operations of a mining operation in the context of a business, because at the end of the day, that's what we're doing, and in any mining operation that isn't successful does not make a successful business. And just talking generally for a minute here, the business framework, which applies equally well to mining operations, really boils down to what you're trying to achieve. In basketball, the objective is to score points, not run up and down the court. And Stephen Curry, I think, has proven that this year, because he scored 400 or something 3-pointers. So he's obviously decided that, you know, the better way to score points in basketball is to throw 3-pointers from a long way back rather than running up and down, and it's working pretty well for him. And in the similar sense, the business is in the same context. The objective is to generate profit and value, not just do stuff. So it's all about what jobs you do and making sure you complete them effectively, making sure that all the activities are, value adding, really. So continue on that thread. The core principles of business essentials are that you need to be proactive, you need to do things through action. there's a thread that you probably picked up through this webinar series, which is to reduce complexity. And we've got a bit of information in the public domain on this, how lessons learned from small projects can be applied to big projects and give big benefits there. But really it's about, concentrating on the basic critical tasks and the essentials. And then obviously there needs to be a process of continual improvement. Do those essential things better. So successful mining operations, this is, I guess, a thread that we've seen, but the really successful companies and mining operations set a strong strategic direction. That's often at the board or COO level. They have rigorous methodologies that allow them to understand where the value is and where it isn't, and justify decisions based on those methodologies. They have managerial leadership that pushes those decisions through the business and structures the business in such a way that roles and responsibilities address issues and manage things like firefighting at the right level, rather than having those things detract from medium or longer term decision making. So those first three things are really all about how you avoid getting stuck in the day-to-day without being able to see the bigger picture. And the systems and infrastructure is a bit of a case of horses for courses, where you need the right systems and infrastructure to empower people and make sure they know what they're doing and working collaboratively. And ultimately that aligns and motivates people to do the right thing and reinforces and I guess a commitment for excellence. So there's a number of high-level thoughts here, and this is largely not my words, but a selection of literature, I suppose, that reflects my perspective on what makes some businesses and mining operations successful versus those that aren't. The ones that are successful try to be different, not necessarily better. By being different, you often are better. So I guess that's a point around focus. New problems call for new methods, and in minerals processing and mining operations, there's always new problems. So new methods should also be part of that solution. Success is typically motivated more by meeting a need than a target. So there's quite a long history of sites that have become successful when they have had to be successful. Those that haven't had to be successful can accept the status quo and generally don't perform as well as those that need to be better, for example, coming near end of mine life or being uneconomic. The true strategist more resembles an experimental scientist than a clairvoyant planner, which I thought was an interesting one, that talks about how you don't need to have full confidence in all the details of what you're doing, but you need to make the right decisions for the right reasons. And everything important happens at the edge of chaos. So there's an element where everything that is just humming along stably in perfect control, although that's in some ways ideal, there's an element of that where if you are too comfortable, then you're not challenging what's possible. So now I'd like to talk to what return on investment is, and specifically what we look at when we drive it. And apologies, I don't mind maths. For those that aren't the biggest fan, there's a couple of equations here. I'll try not to lose you and keep it high level. At the end of the day, it boils down to the return on investment is typically the sum of cash flows, and that's what makes up budgets, but it's also important to consider other value and risk. So you'll notice some companies are operating without much cash flow, but they are generating substantial future value. So that's also important at the right levels. So digging into a little bit deeper, the cash flows are revenue minus operating expenses minus investment. The revenue component in the context of a minerals processing operation is the amount of product you're making multiplied by what you sell it for minus the cost of selling it. And the product is throughput multiplied by feed grade, multiplied by recovery, multiplied by an availability. So they're all those terms that we, I guess, are pretty familiar with. Operating expenses is really what it costs you to operate the plant. And it's important to understand and break out, particularly when you do any assessment around this, the fixed and variable components, because the first, say, 1 million tonnes per annum of throughput will come at a certain cost, but the incremental cost of mining or processing more can be much, much less than that. So the fixed and variable components are important. The investment needs to consider the initial costs if you haven't built your project yet, as well as the sustaining, expansion capital and closure costs. Closure cost isn't always part of the equation, but is increasingly becoming so. Value, again, there's a lot of ways you can measure value that may not be reflected in a cash flow. Typically, stakeholder value or value to investors and things like that are becoming more predominant in the market. And then risks. Again, we don't always consider what can and could go wrong, and we don't always assign a value to that. So you put all this together, and you say, like any sort of good business analyst, the approach needs to consider present and future values, and it isn't simply a budget exercise that looks at accounting of past values. So next, I'll talk about provide you some activities that we provide and that we do for sites, and these are the activities that we find are highly value adding. And in some ways, there's a selling message here that aligns with different parts of client organizations, from the C-suite or CEO through to general managers of assets, or superintendents, or people on the tools. So when we're looking at optimizing return on investment, at the highest level, we're trying to trade off or understand the trade-offs between revenue, operating expenses, and investment. So really, depending on the operation, the grades, the commodity, that will swing different ways. High value projects with, say, precious metals at high grades will swing towards recovery more than they will necessarily throughput. Lower value deposits, low grade coppers, will push towards high throughputs and reducing operating costs. So it's important to understand how all these different elements of the business trade off. More recently, there's very strong investor sentiment towards green projects, projects that improve the environment, better tailings management, and becoming better environmental and social custodians of land, for example. So what we do is we do the simplest sense, dashboarding of things like this, so we can sometimes provide up-to-date dashboards of how projects are operating and what their cash flows look like in close to real time. We provide techno-economic modeling and optimization, which is an activity that optimizes all these things that make up ROI. For a medium or longer term improvement to an operation, there's ways that you can look at different pathways for growth that might involve various investments, and an operating strategy, which is really about optimizing the KPIs to which sites operate. And a lot of that messaging sells quite well to the CEO and C-suite, who are really interested in lots of this stuff. And if there is the right amount of buy-in, that message can filter through the whole organization and achieve some common alignment there. When you look at some of the next level activities, they're more about improving some specifics. So process control optimization is a specific technical area that has improved in recent years, and now there's a number of different packages that can give you much better process control than, I guess, industry standard 5 or 10 years ago. So it's a lot more feasible, a lot more usable to put in, for example, advanced process control, and there's often some good wins in that. There's a piece here around mine to market, about how you optimize the mine all the way through to product. You might do some work around geometallurgy or trading off grade and recovery, refining your mine design in the context of the plant constraints. And you may provide some tools that standardize the way that operators are making decisions and running the plant and mine. Obviously, things like that have been reasonably successful in our experience, and there's also major clients that have put a lot of effort into standardizing the way that they operate their assets. Understanding the constraints is critical to knowing where your value levers are, and technical support is a relatively simple one in concept, but it's really highlighting that it's difficult sometimes to get the right people looking at the right problems at the right time. And if you do that, there's improvement to revenue or reducing investment costs or improving value of your operation. Put all that together and it gives you a good starting point for working out where the low-hanging fruit is and what the high-value expansion options are. I won't talk too much about asset optimization, as Sergio will cover a lot of this, but there's a number of activities that can be done there to improve the performance of assets. There's a range of topics we've spoken about already during this webinar series that talk about how to reduce investment. And then at the last level, you get, I guess, down to how you actually execute the strategies that have been set by the things I've just mentioned. It's almost a business as usual, and most operating companies are quite proficient at this. The short-term operational planning and executing to plan and the operation and maintenance aspects is generally pretty good. I guess the other areas I've been talking about is where you can build a strategy around those things that provides for some better medium and long-term value. So look, I thought I'd put this slide up. This one just talks about the opportunities that are not uncommon within minerals processing plants, and we've presented a number of specific examples over this webinar series that talk to some of these already. Really, the takeaway message from this slide is that the value potential from each of these individual opportunities is compelling, or can be very compelling. They don't always apply, and they don't always apply at the same sites at the same times, but typically there's at least a few of this list that we tend to see. So we can talk about some specific examples, and Harold will give some specifics around what we've achieved at Capricorn Copper. Overall, I guess the final point here is that you can make all these improvements to the process plant, and they can be very significant. Then if you do that back to the mine to mill piece, there's additional value that you can often get, and Gerald Whittle explains this very well in his course. But when you go back to look at strategic mine planning, you can then improve the overall way the mine is developed and the overall resource, and increase low-grade projects, low-grade ore into the plant. And what I haven't spoken about here is in any detail, but we did cover earlier, is the other projects that you can include in your long-term growth strategies that can provide more value over and above what I'm showing here. So that is the initial context. I'll now pass to Sergio, who will talk about the importance of the right operational strategy.
Thank you, Matt. Hi, everyone. Look, what I wanted to discuss with you guys today is talk a little bit about my experience, basically in looking at the operational strategies in different projects across the globe. I think Ausenco has a global reach, and we have been able to do some of this work for companies in South America, North America, Africa, and APAC. And some things tend to be different from culture to culture and the way that they operate. But in most cases, what we end up finding out is very similar. And it's all sort of like from the point of view of how do we improve in a way that balances, risk, cost, and performance. And that's what I wanted to sort of like briefly discuss with you guys today. So if you can please go to the next one. So, of course, the first thing that you need to do is understand where you are. And this is a very holistic approach to that. So we need to understand, how is your leadership and management in general looking at the problems, and what are the policies that drive our whole organization in getting the results that we're looking for. For that, you need to be, very aware of how your organizational structure supports your overall goals. How good are you communicating between the different areas of the business? I'm talking about operations, maintenance, finance, human resources, and of course, what is the skill set of the people, and are they prepared and properly addressed within the organization. Systems is a key part of any organization, because when you wanna put your processes together, you need systems that support them and are actually tailored to what the organization needs. And of course, those systems go into several different aspects, safety and environment being, utmost importance for any company. The financial and operations and maintenance are also there. And then what are the processes that you are currently using, and how are they functioning within your organization? Like asset management, like your strategy management, your work management, and your defect elimination, basically. We can go to the next one, please, Matt. So what we typically find when we look at our clients and do assessment to understand where they are is that highly critical risk and highly critical assets are usually very well managed, especially when it comes to safety and environment and all of the statutory requirements for any organization. But when it comes to other assets that maybe don't have the same impact on the whole bottom line, but those small unmanaged risks can sum up to a very big risk for the whole organization. Usually those are not really that well managed. When it comes to processes, usually you don't find systematic processes to assess the balance between the risk and cost and performance of the assets. So you will find good performance on when it comes to work management, or you will find that financial control it's properly done at your organization. But usually there are other processes like asset management, for instance. This is more of a new concept in a way, that are not really that embedded, and because they are holistic, they tend to not permeate within the whole organization in the same way, because it's not seen as a immediate requirement usually, because it's not something that is solving a problem that you have right now, but it's looking more at the future. Tools are essential. Usually what we find is that are not corporate tools to manage this information, especially the strategy detail information. And I will talk a little bit more in detail about this, but how are we actually managing the risk, and what activities need to happen to be able to properly manage those risks? And where there are no tools, what happens is that there is really no governance. And that is, from a corporate perspective especially, it's a very tricky position to be in, not understanding exactly if everyone else is doing things in the same way. And we are talking about risk here, so it's something that of course we need to be able to manage and understand properly. And when it comes to a strategy, the lack of long-term view on the asset life cycle. So I'm talking about what is my expected availability of my assets, what is my expected cost in the future for those assets. All of those things are usually managed on a very year-to-year basis, maybe to a 5-year plan kind of a scenario. But when it goes into the life of mine, you usually don't get the level of detail that we think is required to make the best decisions today to keep our assets performing as they need. We can move to the next one, please. So I want to talk a little bit about what's the actual goal here, and this is based on the core principles that Matt was talking about. Is we need to understand and manage business risk. That is because they impact value, they impact revenue, they impact the ability to get the investment that you need. So being able to understand and properly manage the risk, it's at an organization level, is really important. And it's something that when you see it, there are, again, good examples of where that is being done properly, but it's mainly for the highly critical assets in the organization, like fire protection systems and everything regarding with insurance, like I said, or statutory requirements from the particular country where you're operating. But when you are going down in that list and finding out what the specific areas of the business are doing, you will find that they all tend to operate and use different tooling, different methodologies, and apply them in the way that they see fit. And that, of course, incurs in a risk. It's not saying that they are not doing the right thing. It's saying that the governance is pretty much dependent on the people that you have there and the tools that you have there. You know? And of course, what you're trying to aim with this is to be able to accurately budget and forecast. We talk about, you know, on the returns of investment equation, how important is the operational expenditure there, you know, and your ability, especially from the financial point of view, to accurately predict when you need to incur the cost for your organization, you know, and allow them to prepare for that and properly manage what it means to get those fundings, you know. With that, you get, if you are able to properly understand and manage your risk and be accurate in your budgeting forecasting, then you can get to a stable and consistent operation. And that's sort of like the main drive that it should be behind any of this. We want to know, you know, and every investor would want to know how this is going to behave in the future and be confident that their investment is going to be properly managed and taken care of, and they are going to get the results that are good. But for that, you need to be able to prove you have a stable and consistent operation. And the other thing that it's important, and we tend to see a lot with different clients, is when you look at improvements, everyone is working on improvements and doing the best that they can on how to maximize, you know, recovery or throughput or availability, you know, or quality of the product. But when all those efforts are independent and basically executed by the really good people that work on the company, you don't have a framework for them that allows them to be sustainable. So if the area changes or the operational context changes or the market conditions change, you tend to see those things dwindling down and not working anymore. So one of the other things that it's a big goal for any organization is to be able to get sustainable improvement, is to make them, you know, last long and allow you to obtain those benefits, you know, in the future. If we can go to the next one, please. So a little bit about the journey. What is the way that we usually tackle that, and how most organizations tend to approach this is you need to develop your operational strategy. You need to understand, of course, what is the actual criticality of the assets, and you need to make sure that that criticality is done consistently across your organization. You know, even if it's a small site, you want the whole site to have the same measurement, the same rules and methodologies around understanding that. If it's a big organization, more important than ever. You know, are you aware of, is everyone doing the same thing? Is everyone addressing this in the same way? And is the criticality being you know, assessed in a consistent manner? Once you understand that and you can prioritize your focuses, you need to understand, of course, what is the purpose of each of the assets. What are they there for? And are they actually adding value to my business, you know, and how are they adding value to my business? Once you understand that, in technical terms, that is called sort of like the asset function, you need to understand how that can go wrong. What are the ways that that objective or goal cannot be obtained because something happens? And that is the analysis step. You look throughout all of your assets, you look at the ways that those assets cannot fulfill their purpose, and then you list everything that you need to address, basically. Once you have that, you define the activities, you know, operational and maintenance wise, that you need to perform on your assets, and from there you can move into, of course, what is the resource. You know, we can have a big wish list of things that we need to manage. We now know how important they are because of the criticality. Then now we can look at what are the resources required, and then we package all of that in the usual documentation that the organizations use, you know, and their maintenance management system and operational accounting systems, and you package all of those activities in a way that the organization can use. How do you do that? You deploy that documentation, configuration information, master data for your ERPs or CMMS in a way that it's, again, consistent and fully aware of what is the reasoning behind. What you usually find in most organizations is that this bit is, it's somehow done, but when you look at the history or how did you come up with these activities and why are you exactly doing what you're currently doing, there is a lack of understanding, because in many cases the people that build those strategies in the beginning are not there anymore, and the people that were involved in the process weren't there anymore. And that's why I was highlighting the importance of having a tool to get that degree. And there are not that many. There are some tools in the market for that, but it's something that it's increasingly becoming important, and more organizations are jumping into, okay, how do I govern the information in a way that allows me to look back and see what we did and how we need to improve, especially when we are in situations where we are not, able to achieve what we need. And then, of course, the startup of all of that information in the management systems of the company. Then you go into the usual implementation phase, where work management in the operation sense is the biggest part, the biggest process for it. And it's basically identifying what you need to do, plan for that, make sure that you have the right resources and labor and contractors to do it, schedule it in a right way that minimizes the impact on the operation. Execute the work in a skillful way, in a good manner, close that execution, and be able to take the learnings for everything that went well and that what didn't go that well when were executing the work. And then you need to also analyze that whole process again and see where are new opportunities to improve, and put all of this back into the journey again, and keep that culture of continuous improvement. That's one of the core principles that we were talking, continuous improvement. If we can go to the next one, please, man. Now, a few recommendations of where to look when we're talking about performance. Always availability is one of the big things, especially from the maintenance point of view. The usage or utilization of your assets and how you maximize that is what you're trying to understand and find a better way, especially with the production teams, and how you can improve that. And of course, all the metallurgy, and Harold is going to talk much more in depth about the specifics, but how do you improve your recovery? So at the end, you are getting extended availability, better utilization, better recovery, by instance, more product, more good product, better revenue for the organization. From the cost perspective, one of the key things to be very aware of is when we're doing cost cutting exercises or cost optimization exercises, we need to be very mindful of the risk. So if we stop doing something because we want to save some of that money today, what is the actual risk that we are incurring, and when is that risk going to maybe come back to haunt us in the future? And that's why we mean how it's so important to understand the whole life cycle of an asset, because you need the sustainability in the long term for it. The other ways that you can look at is, of course, the effective use of labor. And that is very much in line. If you build the right strategy on the beginning and you understand your resourcing properly, it's much easier to understand what things and what corners can you cut on the process and what things you shouldn't, because you are going to drive, your availability and utilization down. And of course, optimizing stock levels. When you have a good view of how the life cycle of the asset works, you can very much be very specific on what are the stock levels that you need, and when are you going to be needing them. And that financially is very important for any organization. Now, risk here is the thing that we're trying to manage in the best way. And like I said, when we come to safety and environment, that is very well managed in most companies and organizations. Business risks are usually well understood at high level. But again, when we come to the granular thing of a specific asset on an operation and how it impacts our business, sometimes we don't have the tooling required to do it. We have the knowledge of the people, but there is no process or tooling behind to do that very well. And of course, the integrity of your assets and how well they are going to perform and for how long. And then that drives what are your capital investments decisions and when you need to make those to keep your operation running as you expect, And all of this is part of basically having and becoming, operational excellence. So continuous improvement culture, embracing the digital transformation, the amount of information and data that we can have today from our systems is so big that we need to start looking for new toolings like, machine learning and artificial intelligence, just to be able to understand and make good decisions. But I'm always mindful of coming back to basics and also look at, if we are properly addressing the basic measurements of our business and our process, what is the actual information? It's not just applying technology for the sake of technology. It's more about what is my final result? What is my return on investment on what we need to implement today? And if that technology is supporting that, go for it. But if that is not the case and you're not entirely sure on how is that supporting, don't just do it because it's the buzzword of the day, or if something that is going to get probably some of your managers off your back because you're showcasing that you're doing something. And I'm very mindful about this whole concept of doing something instead of being effective about what we do. And that's something that we try to drive with all of our clients, is how do we are effective? We are doing the right thing, and then think about how we become efficient and how we become good at doing what we already know needs to be done. But many times we see that organizations go into the effort of doing something because, for the sake of it, because of appearing to be, but that something is not really what you need. And we have, of course, we can do benchmarking. Like I said, we have done this kind of work across the globe in different organizations and different industries, not just in mining. And what we see is it's important, and the learnings from those is something that we can share with everyone. We can go to the next one, please, Matt. So just to finalize my part of the talk, I just want to talk about a specific achievement that we have. It's something that we did here in Australia with MMG Century Mine a couple of years ago. It was a very interesting project for us. They were looking for improving utilization, efficiency, but they also needed to reduce the cost. What we applied, the other main thing for us, and it was a new kind of approach, it was a performance-based contract. So basically, according to the improvements and the savings that we could get, we will get, the payback from the whole thing. So it's a risk approach that we took, and we did it with confidence because we were very aware and knowledgeable on the methodology that we were going to use and the goals that you can achieve and from it. So of course we needed to agree to a set of targets for cost and productivity and reliability of the assets. We needed to understand, did a complete review on baseline cost of performance to get that picture of where they were at the beginning of the project. Then we did the assessment as we were discussing. We looked through their strategies, we look at the cost profiles, we look at all of the critical assets, and from that we were able to, of course, get an optimized strategy for them. We then updated the work management system, that basically deploying the work that we did with them on that. And then, of course, because this is a change management process and it requires a lot of the people in the organization to be involved, throughout the process, we talk with all of the stakeholders, and by the end of them, we keep on doing coaching, mentoring, and training to them to be able to achieve, this new way of doing things. They will keep doing the usual operation and maintenance, but with little tweaks there that made a whole of a difference. But they needed to understand why that was happening and how that will improve their actual experience at their job. And the outcomes were incredible from our point of view. We were aiming for a 10% initial reduction on operational cost for that particular operation, and we actually were able to obtain 70%. And we say sustainable because given that we did it using the risk-based approach to the cost reduction, we were able to almost, keep the same availability and reliability for the assets, but reducing the cost. Why? Usually because there were activities that were not an added value to the actual, objectives of the company that we removed and didn't create an impact. We needed to add some of them, but usually when you add activities in this sense, you're adding preventive stuff, inspections, and activities that don't require a significant cost for the organization, but are able to prevent very significant failures. So that's what I wanted to talk with all of you today. So if you have any more questions, you can post it on, on the chat, or I'm happy to talk to any of you after the fact. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Sergio. I'll pass to Harold to talk about his experience at Capricorn Copper Mine.
Okay, thanks, Matt, and hi, everyone. I'm very pleased to be presenting from the Capricorn Copper Mine site in northwest Queensland. The image you see on the screen is part of the concentrator to which I have dedicated most of the of my days over the last 18 months, working with an amazing team of professionals, key for the successes that we've delivered for our client. Today, I will talk about how incremental improvements can lead to great things. And to begin with, going to the next slide, I will speak about the big successes achieved from incremental changes. We were awarded the operations and maintenance contract in January 2019. And comparing the 2018 results to date, we have been able to increase the nameplate capacity by 50%, increase recovery by 4% in absolute terms, despite a reduction in the copper feed grade, and achieve increases in concentrate grade, mill operating time, and ore milled year on year, leading to a 40% revenue increase on a relative basis. So what resources and skills were required for this? If you can go to the next slide, Matt. Thank you. It's truly a team effort. We don't operate in silos, and as the diagram shows, there are multiple aspects and principles to run an operation successfully. We have a solid team on site, which has support and resources from different business lines and teams at Ausenco, ranging from engineering, procurement, through to technical experts to provide solutions. People and technical expertise are the most important ones to get things in motion, head in the right direction, and build on the team's experience or knowledge of other places' learnings or benchmarks. So how did we do it? If you can go to the next slide. So I believe most of us on this webinar know the equation on the left-hand side of the slide. So where to start? What do we want from any value improvement initiative? With a focus of delivering and improving value, we looked at optimization initiatives based on impact on value and how much cost and effort they would take to be developed. And focus over this period has been around the quick wins and projects that require no major capital expenditure for plant upgrades, which are going to be discussed in the next slides. Key takeaways we want to convey from this is many incremental changes over a sustained period can deliver significant results, and solutions don't always have to be new and novel. Often a simple solution driven by strong technical support and using learnings from the team's experience can lead to good results. If we can go to the next slide, please. So the baseline challenges we had, just to provide a bit of background, so the CCM processing plant is a conventional copper sulfide concentrator, as you can see in the process flow chart on the right-hand side. It receives material from 3 mines, all different one another in terms of both ore hardness and flotation performance, which drive the overall plant performance. When we took over the operations, we've been facing challenges related to constraints changing from the concentrator to the mine and back again, low mill availability, SAG mill line life, which at the start was about 8 weeks, and which is quite short and incurred in a higher OPEX and multiple reline shutdowns, and other challenges related to mill power utilization, ultrafine particle generation, and poor circuit stability with high amounts of spillage in the flotation circuit. Despite all these challenges, we were committed to achieving the budget and maximizing the value for Capricorn Copper. So in this slide, I'm going to talk about the grinding improvements. So the first 3 items, the sack lifter and liner redesign, sack feed chute redesign, and media charge adjustments allowed for a significant reduction in the plant downtime and improved mill stability. The ability to operate at the higher ball charge up to 18% from the original 12.5% based on the updated sack liners design and foundation, thus increasing the power utilization there, and increase mill throughputs by around 35%. In addition to this, the last 2 initiatives in this slide, high intensity blasting and pre-crushing of harder ores, were assessed using the Ausenco technical solutions software called Ausenco to forecast the increase in throughput and support the business case to implement these initiatives, bringing value to Cap Copper. You can go to the next slide, please. So other grinding improvements that are remarkable have been the SAC trommel redesign, changing material from steel to polyurethane to reduce the pegging of apertures, installation of a ball mill retaining ring, which has allowed us to operate at a higher media level in the ball mill in order to assist with the increase of power utilization, which has increased by 15 to 20%. And overall, the control and mill stability initiatives, as well as operating strategy improvements with respect to media addition, mill weight, and cyclone feed pressure targets. You can go to the next slide, please. With a quite similar approach, we also improved the flotation circuit. As I mentioned before, we have ores coming from 3 mines, quite different one another. And the flotation circuit is challenging to control without understanding the metallurgical domains. The key driver for performance is pyrite, which is abundant in certain domains and at times difficult to depress to achieve the target concentrate grade. So out of the list presented in the slide, key improvements then have been blending of all sources to manage pyrite in feed, establishment of a recovery model based on plant performance using a sulfur to copper ratio proxy, which you can see in the image in the right hand side at the bottom. So that's improved the predictability of recovery, and as well it's assisted to achieve more realistic estimates for performance benchmarking and business planning. Other two to mention here is test work and mineralogical characterization to understand the drivers for recovery, and process control modifications to enhance our baseline for further optimization. Going to the next slide, in the concentrate handling and tailings management areas, we also made a number of improvements, and related to the concentrate filter, it had issues with the feed pressure, which we were able to overcome them and reduce the likelihood of causing filter plates cracking. So that was related to tuning of the feed cycle, and as you can see in the image, the pressure would overshoot, but then this was normalized and controlled better to a target set point. And in particular to tailings, we developed an automated density control to improve water recovery, which, as you can see at the bottom right hand side, became much more stable after the implementation of the controller in terms of achieving a higher thickener underflow solids density. With the upgrades in throughput in the upstream units, we had also upgraded the tails thickener pumps and tailings discharge line because this became the bottleneck. And other improvements worth mentioning have been a noticeable increase in maintenance PMs, warehouse upgrades, and process consumables rates reductions through the use of control loops. So where are we going now? And this is where I'll talk about in this slide. So over the next 12 months, we will continue to improve and optimize the plant to achieve higher production and throughput rates. And amongst a range of initiatives, I want to highlight a few of them, which is the ore segregation on the ROM pad and geometallurgical domaining, for which we are in the process of getting data and analyzing it to build this into the block model in conjunction with geology and mining, flotation and regrind mill optimization work, and also optimization of the grinding circuit and primary cyclones operation to improve mill stability. I'd like to wrap up this presentation with talking about elements or keys to success. And most of you would have been familiar with the flow chart on the left-hand side, which has been presented in our past webinars. And establishing trust is critical. We focus on creating alignment and trust with our client and within the team through effective communications, trying to seek buy-in from different stakeholders by demonstrating the benefit of a well-implemented improvement, or on the opposite, the impact of not getting it right. We have engaged specialists and technical experts, both of Ausenco, leveraging from our operators' experience, our people on site experience, and equipment providers. And most importantly, we make sure that all stakeholders work together to achieve the common goal, which in the end is delivering value for the operation. So that is our Capricorn Copper Operations project and how we've improved the mine's performance since we took over. I'd like to say a big thank you to all the team and fantastic professionals I have had the pleasure to work with. And to all the attendees, I hope that you have been able to get good insights from this presentation and can apply to your operations. So if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the Q&A box. And now I will hand the floor back to Matt Powell for the Q&A session. Over to you, Matt.
Yeah, thanks very much, Harold. Well done. Fantastic presentation, and same to you, Sergio. Really enjoyed both of those. Yeah, please feel free to put any questions in the question box as we go. We've got about 8 or 9 minutes for some questions. I might start this first one to yourself, Sergio. You mentioned in your talk it's important for operations to get a good baseline of where they are when you sort of start the asset optimization process. How do you do that, and what's involved, and what does it look like?
Well, usually what we do is an assessment, basically, on the whole processes and system and people of the organization. It's something that takes no longer than a week, and it conducts several interviews with the people on site in all of the different stakeholders in, like I said, finance, operations, maintenance, supply chain, and all. We have a very distinct methodology and analyze 23 points. And that comes, of course, of looking at the evidence and the testimonies from the people. And you can very quickly, get a picture of what you're looking at and how that's produced. So once we do that, we provide, of course, a report with the findings and all the recommendations. It's something that in most cases, we sort of it's the initial work that we do for a client, because we want to understand where are there, the bigger, the quick wins, as Harold described it before. What are the things that they need to put? In some cases, it has to do with the maintenance strategy. In other cases, it has to do with operational strategy. In some cases, it has to do with how supply chain is being driven. So it varies a lot from client to client. And look, my experience is that like companies, depending on the industry and how big is the risk for the industry, tend to behave better in these assessments, like aviation and of course oil and gas. When it comes to or when they have very low returns on investment, or basically their margin for doing things is very small, so they need to be very efficient. You will find very good examples. I think the best company that we look at was actually a manufacturer, a paper manufacturer, doing tissues, and because they didn't have the margin, all their processes were really good because they didn't have the space to fail, so that puts a different pressure. And in mining, in most cases, to be honest, is not the best performance. There are a few that are a little bit up from most of them, but yeah, it's still a very sort of like I don't know if it's old-fashioned the way, but the way that they do things tend to be very consistent across the globe, actually.
No, thanks, Sergio. Interesting comments there. I've got a comment here from Albert Sabo. He says, firstly, thanks to the AusIMM, Ausenco and all presenters. Honest, open communication and information exchange is foremost to a safe, successful mining operation. And I think we probably wouldn't agree more violently with that statement, as you've put it. I guess that's right. People and trust is definitely a big part of it. Got a question for yourself here, Harold. Have you observed any challenges in the last, say, 2 years since you've been on site, convincing people of reasons to do things or convincing people of the value? And have you sort of found any barriers around that? Challenges, I suppose.
Yeah, I think there is good quality of people are around site, and they're pretty open and honest in what they are, and open to receive feedback. So that's also very good, because that gives you the opportunity to discuss, have meaningful conversations regarding different aspects, and how to improve every time and work towards the a common goal. So I think that's been something that that in a sense, people is something that we don't really talk or praise that much, but obviously it's key to the success of the operation.
No, good one. Thank you. There's a question here. How do you quantify risk and value in a financial sense? And do you lose some definition when you distill qualitative, social, environmental consequences to economics? And that's an interesting question. I was actually on a site last week that is looking to transform their tailings from a wet tailings to a dry tailings storage, and where we landed with a bunch of work was it's very likely that it will be possible to achieve similar tailings costs over the remaining life of the asset by shifting to a dry storage rather than continuing the same wet storage. But what we found was that there wasn't a clear economic driver on a cash flow basis to make that decision. However, there may very well be, and we're yet to get to the bottom of this, but there may very well be and likely be other values to that particular company, whereby if they demonstrate new technology in this space, then they obviously can apply that to their other operations, and that's worth a lot. Secondly, there's a corporate value, and there's a citizenship value, and there's a permitting and custodian value to that company of changing the way they deal with their waste material. So at a site level, that positive value and reduction of risk, they're both in the same breath in this context, isn't captured, but at a corporate value they are. So I guess this comes back to where you make the decisions and at what level you make the decisions, and make sure you add all those qualitative things up as best as you possibly can, because it may make the decision quite simple in this instance. If the cost is the same and the risk is similar on balance, then why not go for a better solution? I've got a question for you, Sergio. How much is fear of failure an issue in getting traction, if you like, on different sites? And is there a difference between small operations and big operations in motivating change?
Sorry, what failure did you mention? What kind of failure?
Is there a fear of failure? Have you seen people sort of reluctant to accept things because they're scared it might not work and they'll be responsible? And obviously we've heard from Harold on how he's been able to, I guess, make changes in a small operation, but in a large scale, sometimes that can be more difficult. Perhaps have you observed that from an asset optimization perspective?
Yeah, for sure. Look, I think, and I've learned this after a few failed attempts of doing this work, especially early in my career, and it's all about the involvement of the people in the process. You need to be able to make them aware, because I work for the consulting business line within Ausenco, so we can advise our clients, this is the way that you should do. And what we do is basically manage the process. We don't build the outcome itself, So the information comes from them. We put it through this sieve, that is the process that we use, and then we gave that back to them for their execution. So the only way that, and it failed miserably where in the past, not with Ausenco, to be honest, we tried to just come with the answers and just let them execute the answer that we have, because we thought we were so smart at the time. And then we realized, no one wanted to do it because they didn't trust the thing. Why would they trust something that they haven't seen? They don't look at the process. They don't know the people that build it. So it's I would say in our typical projects, the main risk of failure of the project itself is the buy-in of the organization and the stakeholders. And the only way that you can tackle that is constant communication, involvement of everyone, and making basically they own the strategy. And that is something that it needs to be very clear. We can help you set it up properly, but you are the owners and you are accountable for the outcomes. In most cases, once you have those conversations, you actually achieve a good result and they sort of like see it, because again, it's something that they came up with. It's something that they were pushing to do, and we were just facilitating that process of getting from the old way of doing things into a new way of doing things. Yeah, but it's not easy, for sure.
No, it never is. That's why we like the challenge, I suppose. Well, that basically takes us to the time. I'll just a couple of thanks to everybody who's joined us on this webinar and the earlier webinars. We really hope you've enjoyed them. If you have any subsequent questions and would like to reach out to us, you're more than welcome. You can find us on LinkedIn, or you can get our email addresses off the Ausenco website. We'd be more than happy to help out or have a chat around any particular topics that you've seen come up. And thank you lastly to AusIMM for hosting us in this webinar series. We hope it's been of use to everybody who's listening in, and that you've been able to take hopefully some points out of it. At that point, I'll hand back to Brian. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matt, and thank you to Sergio and Harold as well for joining us on the webinar today. To everyone that has attended the series, we hope you've found the series insightful. The recordings will be made available. We hope you found today's presentation insightful, and that you'll join us for future AusIMM webinars. So thank you once again to Matt, Harold, and Sergio, and enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Goodbye.